Hi, this is Allison Sheridan of the No Silicast podcast, hosted at podfeet.com, a technology geek podcast with an ever so slight Apple bias. Today is Saturday, December 21st, 2024, and this is show number 1024. Well, we're going to be off for the holidays here. Didn't want to miss a show, so we're coming out a day early, and I hope that doesn't throw anybody off. But remember, there will be no live show on Sunday, December 22nd. You probably remember in early December in No Silicast number 1021 that you heard an interview with our friend and certified Apple consultant Pat Dengler about how her neighbor was this close to giving up $30,000 in cash to some scammers who had woven an elaborate web of lies to trick her. After Tom Merritt called this story Darknet Diaries worthy, Steve encouraged me to make that interview a standalone chit-chat across the pond. We wanted to send it to our friends and relatives, so we thought you might want to do it too. Look for Chit Chat Across the Pond in your podcatcher of choice for episode number 804, Pat Dengler on an elaborate scam involving Amazon, the FBI, lawyers, and more. And now it's time for the 13th annual reading of Steve's ever so slightly modified version of The Night Before Christmas. This is dedicated to our dear friend and longtime No Silicastaway, Honda Bob, who left us in 2019.
'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a trackpad. Okay, work with me here. The AirPods were hung by the chimney with care in hopes that all things iMaker would soon be there. The No Silicastaways were nestled all snug in their beds, while visions of iPads danced in their heads. And Podfeet in her kerchief, and I in my cravat, had just settled down for a long winter Skype chat. When out on the lawn there arose such a clatter, I sprang from the keyboard to see what was the matter. Away to the windows I flew like a flash drive, tore open the shutters, and nearly did a nosedive. The moon on the breast of the new-fallen snow gave the luster of brushed aluminum to objects below. When what to my eyes seemed very bizarre, but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny cars, with a little old driver with whom elves hobnob, I knew in a moment it must be Honda Bob. More rapid than 5G, his vehicles they came, and he tweeted and shouted and called them by name. Now Accord, now Civic, now Fit and CRV, on Element, on Ridgeline, on Pilot and Odyssey. To the top of the porch, to the top of the wall, now drive away, drive away, drive away all! As dry leaves that before the reality distortion field endowed, when they meet with an obstacle mount to the cloud, so up to the housetop the vehicles they flew, with a sleigh full of Apple products, and Honda Bob too. And then in a twinkling, I heard with a squeal the skidding and sliding of each little wheel. As I drew in my head and was turning around, down the chimney Bob came with a bound. He was dressed in coveralls from his head to his foot, and his clothes were all tarnished with oil and soot. A bundle of SSDs he had flung in his Scotty vest, and he looked like a geek who was extremely obsessed. A wink of his eye and a look not too pious soon gave me to know he had an Apple bias. He spoke not a word, but texted his concern, and filled all the stockings, then hit return. And laying his finger aside his levitation app, a command to his iPad, up the chimney, ASAP. He sprang to his sleigh, and his autos did they bristle, and away they all flew as if shot from a missile. But I heard him exclaim, as the poem prescribed, Happy Christmas to all, and please stay subscribed.
Well, thanks for that, Steve. I know this is a holiday tradition the No Silicastaways always look forward to. With that, let's jump into some serious tech nerdery. I'm going to do something now that I've never done before, and that's introduce a guest about whom I know virtually nothing. I have evidence that Steve Mattan is a listener to the Programming by Stealth podcast because he has contributed several fixes and valuable suggestions through GitHub to the project. He also participates in our Slack at podfeet.com/Slack. Beyond that, I literally don't know anything about his background. I don't know where he lives. I don't know how tall he is. I don't know anything, but I do know that he has something super interesting to tell us about. So with that great introduction, welcome to the show, Steve.
Oh, thank you very much. I can fill in some of those blanks. I live in Southampton, New Jersey.
Okay.
Which is just inside the New Jersey Pinelands the National Pinelands Reserve.
Oh.
Which means I live in the woods.
Oh.
Not the North Woods, The Eastwoods. There we go. Steve from the Eastwoods. We could do that. I have a bachelor's degree in physics
Ooh.
and a master's degree in computer science. And as soon as I got the master's degree, the company that was paying for it moved me into management. So I've never written a bit of code in anger in all those years.
You know, that's kind of the path that Bart went along. He was getting his PhD in physics when I first met him, and I always worried that getting into podcasting was why he stopped his PhD, but he swears that has nothing to do with it. But I'm pretty sure he's got a degree in computer science too. So you are definitely our people. That seems to be all we need to know. That's very interesting. You haven't written any code in anger, because most of the contributions you've made have been about code.
Yep. So I wrote some utilities for myself back at that job. The company paid for me to go to grad school.
Oh, nice.
I went back in college, RPI, Troy, New York, 12181. I graduated in 1982. 1982 was the height of the Reagan recession. That one of the paths when you're tired of going to school was to get a job and have the company pay for you grad school for physics. Well, nobody got jobs that year. All right.
Okay.
So eventually I got a job, kind of pseudo programming. And then I got hired. I got moved down to our corporate office, the development shop, and I was put in charge of testing. I was the one tester for 12 programmers because infamously, one of the VPs told all of our customers that they were supposed to test it for us. And why weren't they sending in all those bug reports? Why are they just complaining? That didn't go over big. Anyway, I started writing small utilities for myself and said, "Ooh, this is interesting." Although in physics, my project was computer modeling of the surface-enhanced Raman effect, which was in Fortran many, many years ago.
Ooh, Fortran 4 with Watt 5.
Yes, there you go. Yep. So then I said, okay, well, they'll get them to pay for me to go to grad school. I did. And as soon as I got the degree, they said, nope, we want you to be a manager now, and put me in charge of building out actual testing group. So that's...
From what I've seen, it appears to be in your DNA to mess around with code. So what we started talking, you actually did a post in Slack where you described, and I'm going to give the opening pitch for it, but then I want you to get a little bit into the details. We are definitely not going to get into the weeds because we could go here for hours and have too much fun. But you figured out a way to run a large language model, AI, if we'll call it that, on your Mac without actually being connected to the internet. Like, it runs locally. Is that correct?
Well, I didn't figure it out.
Well,
but I was able to implement it.
You Legoed the pieces.
So yes. But even it gets better. I've got and that screen over there running on a Raspberry Pi.
Oh, nice.
Anyway, so the tool. All right. So let's step back. This is a book. You can't see the book if you're listening, but it's Learn AI Assisted Programming with GitHub Copilot. My company, the one I'm currently working for, the E-Suite people have, just like you were just now, they've drank all of the Kool-Aid, not just some of the Kool-Aid, all of the Kool-Aid about AI.
Okay.
And one of them actually came to my boss, who's the EVP of development, and said, I'm getting people calling me up and saying that they've got these programs that we could use in our business, and they don't even have any programmers. They just ask ChatGPT and it writes programs for them. Why do we need programmers? And he's there, trying to convince them that, it really doesn't work that way. We started a project there, and they said, Steve, you're not writing any code now. Go figure out if this thing can make you a programmer.
Oh, that's actually an interesting way to do it, because you are a programmer, but you're not a programmer.
Right. So I could understand it enough, but I'm not writing any code.
Okay.
And so we decided to do GitHub Copilot as our test, GitHub Copilot, that's the book again. And I was going to learn Python with that in VS Code. And they paid for the Copilot for the experiment. And I tried it.
Just for people who don't know what he's talking about, it basically, when you're in a code editor, GitHub Copilot is trained specifically to help you write code, and it's written by Microsoft.
Mhm.
So it's a
Yeah,
large
so
language
Microsoft, it
model,
was
but
trained
very
on all the
narrow.
code in GitHub. Yeah.
Right.
And it's fun because you got in there and it worked, kind of. Um, even that most of this book is spent telling you that it's not 100% accurate, that 50% of the time it's going to be wrong. And
Mhm.
it teaches you not how to do code in Python, but how to figure out whether or not that code is right. And they even have some nice chapters in there where they say many of the people that teach people and put up GitHub repositories in academia will have exercises, and it'll say, here's the beginning, and then there's the part that says your code goes here as a
Right.
comment. And the people will put in, hey, I'm trying to write this, and they'll get back from GitHub Copilot, your code goes here. Because that's what they're trained on. And we tried it, and we decided, this really wasn't going to help us.
Okay.
And we're not using that. But that got me interested, just like anybody else who's probably listening to this, in large language models and all that. So I was one day wandering around the web, and I saw this thing about Ollama and continue. And
Let's spell that out real quick. Ollama, and Ollama is the large language model that Facebook was written, right? Meta.
Nope.
No.
Llama with no O is the set of models that Meta has written.
Okay.
Facebook. Ollama is a tool that allows you to pick from many, many models to download and run locally on your machine.
Okay. And I said Mac, but it's obviously more than Mac. It's any Unix or run on Windows?
Yep. If you were to go to the Ollama site.
Actually, you did put a link in the show notes already. Yeah. Ollama.com.
Ollama is a tool that allows you to run large language models locally. And it has a whole variety of tools, and it helps you pick different models and different sizes of the models. On my Raspberry Pi, I downloaded a model that's really tiny, 1B. 1 billion.
Yeah, let me explain what I think that means. A small large language model and a large language model, the difference is in the number of parameters in the matrices that make this thing up. I don't know if that's quite the right wording, but a lot of people think, well, what a large language model is built on the whole internet, and a small language model must be on fewer words, and that's not what it is at all. It's the size of the matrix of the model, the number of parameters. So when you said 1B, you mean what? 1 billion parameters?
1 billion parameters. Yep. And there's even smaller models, but you can run those size models on your Pi. On the Mac that I have a Studio with 64 gigs of RAM, right? The more memory you have, the more, because it loads the model into memory to do all the calculations.
Oh, okay. Okay. So you're not caring about disk size. You're caring about RAM. Oh, that's really interesting. Okay.
And you're caring about video RAM, because it tries to do it on the GPU, not the CPU.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Huh. Okay. But when you buy a Mac, can you control how much video RAM you get?
It's all of it. All of it. That's the nice thing about the M series Macs, is all of the RAM is both.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So my machine has plenty of RAM and plenty of CPU power. It's the original Studio M1 Max chip. So if you were to have an M4 with, plenty of RAM in your machine, you should be just fine.
Actually, they don't have an M4 Studio yet, I don't think, do they?
I don't know.
M3, I think, is as light as...
You're the expert. I'm just the...
You're just not a programmer. Okay. All right. So Ollama is this app that you download from Ollama.com, and it's literally just downloads. And then when you open it, it's going to ask you to mess around in the terminal, I think, right? That's what happened.
Yes, it's a terminal app. And what you do is you go into the terminal, and the command to start it is Ollama. But like a number of different terminal apps, that's the command. And then there's a secondary command, just like Git. When you say Git and then the secondary command,
okay,
it's Ollama and the secondary command. So Ollama run, and the model name will, if you don't have that model, pull it down, load it into your system, and then start running it so you can ask questions of Ollama, or not of Ollama, of the model you selected.
Okay, so let's get those pieces again. So Ollama is a way to talk to your terminal to get your terminal to start installing these a large language model. Because I think when I first ran it, you're saying that's when it said, okay, this is what you're going to have to go type into the terminal. When the first time I typed it, it put glop all over the screen, and then it said, okay, I'm ready. And it was just sitting there waiting. And then I could say, Ollama, run that model, and then I could start asking it questions. That was at the command line.
Yep.
Now, Steve, my husband, Steve, asked me an interesting question. He says, how big was it? And that gets back to this thing about thinking of large language models as being big. I said, I have no idea. I don't know where it is. And I used my favorite app for finding things I can't figure out where they are because I don't even know what they're called. I used Find Any File, and it found it buried down in some library file somewhere.
If you go to the Ollama website, and you'll see up over here, there'll be a link that says models.
Right.
And if you look in the models, you can click on a model, and it will show you all of the variants of that model. So, for example, you mentioned Llama earlier. So there's a new Llama, Llama 3.2.
Right.
And that comes in two sizes, 1 billion and 3 billion.
Okay.
And you can look at it and you can click on that, and then it has more information on the page about what that model is, what it does, some of the parameters. And you can look at, there's the Llama 3.1 that has a 8, 70, and 405 billion parameters.
I did end up going down a rabbit hole later, asking it to just install different ones, but I didn't know what it was doing really and what it meant to go into the different ones. I ended up loading Llama 3.2 Vision thinking, wow, that sounds better, but I think it had nothing to do with what I needed it to do. So we've got, we've got this app, the app Ollama. Once that's running, it tells you to go to the terminal and type in Ollama run. I'll get it yet. Ollama run Llama 3.2. So it does all the glop on the screen. From now on, you're pretty much not really talking to Ollama anymore.
Nope, you're talking to whatever model. So in your example right there, you're talking to Llama 3.2. And you're asking that model the questions. So just like if you were using ChatGPT and you asked ChatGPT a question, now you're asking Llama 3.2 a question.
Right. And it's just was sitting there at the command line. I'm not talking to Ollama anymore. It's already done its job.
Yep.
Which is disconcerting. Like while we were talking here, I haven't played with it in a little while. I typed in Ollama and said, okay, launch it. And it went, My Mac just didn't do anything. But over at the command line, I think it should be working. I think I'm doing something wrong, but I can tell it's, we got to start Ollama first. We got to serve it up. So there's a little command line, but at that point, you told us that was fun, but you took it up a level beyond that. And this is where the third piece came into it, right?
Yep. So there's many pieces now. I got all kinds of pieces. So the next thing was, because I was interested in using it as a programming tool to make suggestions similar to Copilot, what I had read was you could use this other tool called Continue. And Continue...
Actually, can we wait to get to Continue? Because I think you did Enchanted next.
Well, Enchanted is a GUI. And if you go to the Ollama GitHub page, again, if you're on the main Ollama page, there'll be a little GitHub up over here. People can't see me pointing to the top of the screen here, right over there. It's over there. You'll see GitHub. And if you go to GitHub and scroll down, you'll see integrations. And there'll be a whole list of tools that are front ends or other tools for using it. And
that's where you found.
The first one is called Open Web UI or Web UI Open something. But the second one is called Enchanted, and it said Mac native. And I said, okay, I use a Mac mostly. Let's try that one. And it's just a simple GUI where you can select the model you want and then run your question.
So at this point, I'm going to keep saying it again. Ollama is what let us be able to download the models onto, and now we have them available to us in the terminal, and we can type little questions and it spits little answers back to us. But as soon as you run Enchanted, Enchanted is talking to that same terminal application that's been, or the model that's been installed. And now you say it's a little GUI, but it looks exactly like ChatGPT to me. It's pretty. It's Mac-like. It's got the right buttons. It's light gray, dark gray. It's got Enchanted's written in colors. I mean, this is it's a very nerdy beginning step, and immediately becomes not nerdy at all.
Exactly. So if you are intimidated by the command line, and you shouldn't be because you've already listened to Taming the Terminal. That's been out for years now, right?
Right.
But if you are, and you're more comfortable with a GUI, then this is a nice one there that you can use. And now the other thing that I said was I took Keyboard Maestro and set it up so that as soon as I start Ollama, it automatically launches Enchanted. So I never have to go into the terminal. I just, go Alfred, Ollama starts, Enchanted starts, and there you have it.
Okay. By the way, I am doing this at a much higher level each time because I'm talking. We're going to be talking to the No Silicast ways, not necessarily programming by stealth folks. Some subset of the two. So as soon as I got to that stage, I was pretty excited. So now we've got Enchanted running. We've got a happy little GUI. Everything's pretty. We don't have to get our fingers too dirty at the terminal. But you really wanted to be able to use this for development. So where did you go next?
So that's where that Continue comes in, and that's a tool that is integrated in both VS Code and JetBrains tools. I don't use JetBrains tools, so I'm not really familiar with what the names are. But
so for the non-programmer, Visual Studio Code is a code editor, does a whole bunch of stuff, but it's kind of nice because it's not kind of nice, it's really nice. It's got a plugin architecture, so people can write these plugins to do things like install, this Continue app that will allow us to talk to the same model?
Yep, exactly right. So it's a plugin. You go into the plugin marketplace, you type in Continue, it'll bring it up. You click Install, it installs it. It says, hey, move the Continue over from the left sidebar to the right sidebar. So you have a little chat window there all the time. And it allows you to do multiple things. There's a little bit of configuration. You have to tell it which model you want for code completion, which model you want for chatting, which model you want for embedding. And they tell you which ones they recommend for different things. So if they tell you for Ollama, they recommend these models. And those models will change over time as new models become available and become replace the old ones, become better and things like that. But they'll walk you through those steps. You set it up.
Okay, so this is where I didn't make it past this step. I got as far as installing it into Visual Studio Code, and it took me a while to get it to start answering questions for me, but I didn't ever notice it telling me how to talk to what model, because I thought we were using the stuff we installed over with Ollama.
Yes. Now, Continue doesn't just use Ollama. Continue will, if you have a ChatGPT API code, you can put that in. It'll use ChatGPT. It'll use Claude. It'll use any of those, Gemini, any of those models. Okay. I was more interested in doing everything locally.
Yeah.
To see what I could do without having to pay anybody, for sending things out to ChatGPT or anybody like that. So I chose as my provider, Ollama.
Okay.
And then since I chose Ollama, any of the models I had downloaded via Ollama were then available in VS Code. And in the configuration for Continue, you want to tell it, this is the model I want to use for code completion. And they suggest, I think it's called Star Coder. So you suggest that. And they said, this is the one you want to use for chat when you're asking it questions about code. And I forget the one I selected for that. But now you've got to go to Ollama and download those models because Continue won't see them unless you've downloaded them.
Okay.
So again, you go to Ollama, but Continue, when you look at the documents on Continue, it'll suggest, if you're using Ollama, these are the models we suggest. They're small enough to run, but they give good results. And they're optimized for code completion and code work. So you want to go to the Continue site read the documentation. It's very simple steps. I mean, I did it in a half hour. I was up and running. And then as I sent you a couple things that were, to me, extremely spooky. I'm learning Python with a textbook called, what's it? I don't have it over here. But Python Crash Course. It's from No Starch Press. And it's the 3rd edition. And apparently it's been quite widely used by people who have uploaded things to places where these models can be trained on, because I'll type in, the start of one of the exercises, and it'll finish the exercise for me completely. And it'll even do, as I showed you, I was doing exercise like 3, and it then did exercise 4 and exercise 5 and just filled them all out and said, "Here, you're done."
That's actually terrible.
Right? It is.
Because you're never going to learn anything.
Spooky. It was delightful and spooky and terrible at the same time, because now it wasn't always right. That's the other thing, because it's being trained on students' answers, and the students don't always get it right. It gets graded, and some of the things. And again, you ask it questions. There was, I wanted to do a loop, and I asked, and I couldn't get the loop right. It's like, okay, the loop is several chapters ahead, but I know loops because, I'm the programmer that doesn't write programs. So I knew, okay, I should be able to do a loop here, and I'm writing a loop in C, and the syntax is not quite the same. So I'm trying to guess. So I should show me how to do this in the chat window, and it gave me an answer that was wrong, but it was close enough that I could say, oh, I see what I'm doing wrong now, and figure it out. And that's where I'm learning, because otherwise I was just frustrated. Right? I'm not getting anywhere. Now it said, okay, here's a hint. And the hint wasn't complete. I still had to figure it out.
Oh, that's good. How did you get it to stop answering for you?
It doesn't. So when you do the code completion, you can either tab and take everything, or there's another keystroke, I don't remember it off the top of my head right now, that you can say just take it a word at a time, right? Or a line at a time. So it was showing me all this other stuff that I didn't really want.
Right.
So I would just say, no, just give me this little bit.
Okay.
Right. That's the help. Or I could go over to the chat window and say, hey, I'm trying to do this. Help me out.
Talk to me.
I'm trying to do a for loop for, this. What's the syntax?
Okay.
They tell me that.
That's interesting. So it's you're chatting with it, and it's doing autocomplete those. And like you said, those were 2 different models you had it point to.
You continue. The continued documentation suggests that you use different models for different things, because they are optimized for different use cases.
One of the things I've heard is that the chat GPTs of the world, Gemini, Claude, those kind of things are actually, those use a lot of resources to build and design, because they're training on the internet. But specialized models are much more energy efficient, so you can feel less guilty about how that was built. Because if you've got a model, for example, that only knows Python, that's going to be that won't have used much energy at all. But okay, it's it's got Python and C and Swift, and it's got a bunch of languages. Then it's going to be a little bit bigger, but that's still really small compared to the internet being part of the training data that went into building those matrices, right?
Yep, exactly. When you read the documentation around these things, they talk about smaller models and targeted models are often much better for this than the generalized model. So if there are models that are trained on code, GitHub Copilot, for example, was just trained on GitHub.
Right.
Now that's good because it's just code, and it's bad because a lot of people like yourself put code out on GitHub. Now, I'm not saying that
common mistakes become common.
Exactly, right? Or if you're trying to do JavaScript, it's using all this old JavaScript.
Oh,
it's not using, it's using var instead of let.
Okay.
And practices like that.
Yeah.
And that's where more targeted ones that they say, okay, now there are other techniques you can do for that. There's context in that chat window, and continue in other tools as well. You can say, here are some documents. Let me load these documents in, and I want you to use these documents as context.
Oh,
so you could use the chapter, right? Now, the problem is that you can only have so many tokens. A token is, you can think of a token as a word. It's really just parts of words.
Okay.
But for our discussion, you can think as a token of a word. So if it says I can have 2,000 tokens, 2K tokens, well, your document can only have 2,000 words. Now, the models will tell you how many they can use. Ollama, when it downloads them, sets everything to 2,000, 2K. So if you want more, you've got to go in and tweak that. So some of them can have up to 128K.
Is that
now?
What's the purpose of the token limit?
The token limit is because that uses resources. If you're going to say
on your machine,
ChatGPT, and you pay for tokens,
right?
You're not going to want to upload all this stuff to ChatGPT and run up a big bill. Or it's also using memory. The other thing is that,
but it's artificial in our example, right? Because we're doing it all locally.
Now, right. But remember, continue isn't just local.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Okay.
Now, the other thing is that even though you have this large context window, everybody can see my hands getting bigger and smaller on the screen here, right? It doesn't always remember it all because it has to load it all into memory.
Okay.
It's already got the model in memory. It's got whatever else you're running in memory. And now it's got to load this into memory. And there's a lot of documentation out there that it says it remembers the beginning, it remembers the end, it doesn't necessarily remember the middle. So you want to target that stuff in context. The other way to do this is RAG. I think it means retrieval augmented generation. And what you do there is you take a whole bunch of documents. I could take that Python book, turn it into a PDF, OCR it. There are steps. I don't know how to do them. I haven't done it yet. But you can do that in a format that the system will understand. Then you upload those in a RAG, and then you say, just look at this stuff. So if you wanted a Python expert, you could take multiple Python textbooks, do whatever process it is to ragify them, and then say, okay,
that's the only place you're allowed to get content from.
Just look at this.
How interesting.
And it's one of the ways that they're trying to make it so these things don't hallucinate.
Yeah.
Which is a big problem.
Well, one of the things I've liked about using large language models is that I can be really tailored in my question. And so like if I try to ask using Google in Keyboard Maestro 5.4 running on macOS Sequoia, what is the syntax to do blah blah blah, it's just gonna barf on me. I mean, it's just gonna give me like the Keyboard Maestro website or something. But in ChatGPT, I'm able to give it that very, very specific thing, like where is the menu that tells me how to do this thing that I'm trying to do? Like I know the menu's there somewhere and I can't find it. And it's not always right, but it understood the question. It didn't understand anything. It regurgitated something that showed that it was at least on the right path. And then I can start to narrow it down. Whereas with Google, you're just getting, the answers are always too broad for what I want. Is I want it in this operating system, on this application, this version of this application. And so I would think with this, you could be able to say, I'm running, using JavaScript version blah, 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 or HTML5 or Bootstrap 5. Give me the answer to my question. Can you do that?
You can. And it's good that you asked it in the context of a programming language, because programming languages are very structured. There's a very well-defined syntax that they have to follow. Thus, the answers are going to be well-known, right? You can tell whether it's right or not right away. Natural language is much less structured.
Right.
So if you ask it a question about natural language topics, it's much more likely to confabulate because it's the words choices are much bigger.
Right.
Whereas in code, it's pretty much, hey, if you put a parentheses, then there's going to be another parentheses eventually.
Right.
And if you're doing a for loop, there's going to be certain things that have to be in that for loop, and there has to be, depending on the language, a colon at the end and curly braces or whatever. Yes.
So it could be wrong, but that's different than hallucinating.
Yes.
Wrong is, boy,
an example.
Everybody makes this mistake.
Yep. Everybody makes this mistake. Here you go. But it's close enough that you can say, oh yeah, I could, or run it through, try to run it in VS Code, and it'll say, oh, hey, you've got an error here. Here's why.
Right.
Finding logic errors or security errors, right? Things like that are more problematic because it's not going to be able to help you with those. And if you're not a good coder, and then this book over here, Learn AI Programming keeps saying that, don't use this for mission critical stuff like medical controls, because there's no guarantee that it's going to have the right safety protocols or the right security protocols in there. You still need to know. And that's, again, why it's good for programmers. There was a thing I read recently that said programming is one of the use cases that'll work because the people that are using it usually have some domain knowledge. Like if we were to use it for the programmers at work, it wouldn't replace them, but they could ask it a question, they'll get it back, and they'll be able to say, yeah, I understand this. Oh, it made this same mistake everybody makes, with SQL injection. So I'll be able to fix that. But like
the old SQL injection, right? Yeah, that's interesting. My reaction to that is, for now, that's true, right?
Mm-hmm.
But as people get lazier because it's doing more and more for us, we're going to be less and less skilled. And that's where it gets a little bit scary.
Oh, it's going to be, it's
going to be a hot mess.
It is. I mean, I read another one. This is getting a little bit off topic here, but about hallucinations. And it's real easy to tell. If it tells you to use glue to keep cheese on your pizza or eat pebbles to get your daily dose of minerals, you can pretty much tell that's wrong. But if you were to ask ChatGPT to give you a review of the movie Wicked, it would happily do that for you. It's never seen the movie Wicked.
Right.
It's just making it all up.
That's actually a really good example because it can't have seen the movie, right?
No, right? So everything it does is that. It just makes things up.
What's putting words in an order that is likely to be said because somebody else has already said it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Oh, one other thing I did see that I did succeed in doing in VS Code running continue was you could ask it to, I forget what it was. It was like tighten this code up or make this more readable. So it took code I had written and it just kind of made it nicer. It made it a little bit tighter.
You can ask it to explain things. Why is this doing it the way it is? You can do it exactly like you said, refactor it.
Yeah, refactored it.
Yep.
And it even put in some nice comments. And I was like, man, that's better than what I wrote. Yeah. But again, you got to know that it's still doing the same thing that you thought it was doing before.
Yeah,
so
it didn't.
Maybe the real trick is going to be people writing tests back to where you started from, right? Is that if you got good tests, you'd be able to verify that it still did what you thought it was going to do. So maybe you write.
I'm pointing to the book again, everybody who can't see this on radio. But anyway, exactly. That's what they keep saying, that the skills are going to change from knowing the syntax and the semantics of the language to writing better requirements up front and test cases at the end to make sure that it's working. Like
Helma keeps trying to convince me, write the tests up front.
But you write the tests along with the code.
Yeah. Well, this is really fun. I love that you grabbed all these pieces, and I know Steve's making it sound like, oh, there was this, and then they told me to do this, and they told me to do this, and told me to do this. But he did a lot of reading between the lines to pull the pieces out, because I go to the Ollama GitHub page, and I'm like, look at all this stuff. I don't know what I would never have known to look at integrations, for example. I would never have clicked on that. But it is as easy as he's saying to do these things. But I really appreciate you showing us where these pieces are and the puzzle pieces we can put together. I've just had a great time talking about this, Steve. I think this is super fun. If people wanted to chat with you about this, would the right place be to go to our Slack, maybe to the PBS channel, or
they can contact me there? Yep.
Any other place you want to plug, you big old Mastodon user or anything like that?
I'm pretty much stay at home, do nothing. When I'm not in Madagascar on 12-hour bus rides and all that. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we did talk about that. Let me ask you one more question. Do you remember how you found programming by stealth?
No. Well, yes, because I listened to Taming the Terminal. I wanted to learn how to use the terminal. And when I was Googling around for references, that came up. So I listened to that. And then from there, I found Podfeet and the programming by stealth.
Well, very good. I, for one, am very glad that you did, and appreciate you coming on the show.
You.
This was super fun. Thanks again, Steve.
Good. I enjoyed it as well.
I still cannot believe that Steve Mattan has never done anything like that before, because I thought he was great. I really, really enjoyed that interview.
Hi folks, Bart here with one of these rare solo review segmenty things. Alison was looking for some content to tide over during Thanksgiving, so I thought I would share some of my recent HomeKit related experiences to do with managing humidity. And until a few months ago, I probably would have assumed that managing humidity meant talking about how to dehumidify things, especially given that I live in Ireland. But no, my journey is about adding humidity, or at least measuring humidity and then adding humidity, actually. So this change of my knowledge of and interest in humidity came about due to some unfortunate health issues. Basically, my nose decided it would like to bleed very heavily to the point that maybe an ambulance trip or two might be a good idea. And one of the things that can trigger, as opposed to sort of be a root cause, but a trigger can be dry air, which causes the mucosa in your nose to dry out. And that will then trigger a nosebleed with a deeper underlying cause. And so I suddenly became interested in figuring out, do I have a humidity problem? And if I do, what should I do about it? So immediately when I got home from hospital the first time, my first question was basically, how in this house can I figure out what it is actually currently like in terms of humidity? And I was pleased to discover that a bunch of unsmart connected, dumb little sensors that I had bought. Actually, I bought the first one mildly passive-aggressively for work when we were having a bit of an argument with our buildings people about the temperature of our office, which was not good. And we needed some facts. And so I looked on Amazon for a cheap thermometer, and I found these really cool little ones that had a little magnetic back on them. And I stuck them to the bezel of my monitor, actually, and it would tell you the temperature. And it also said other things, and I completely ignored all the other things. And when COVID happened, I picked one up for the home office as well to make sure I was working in a comfortable environment. And lo and behold, when I looked down at my little device I'd had for years, I noticed that not only did it say the temperature, it also said the humidity and had a little smiley face to indicate whether or not that humidity was a good thing or a bad thing. And I remember them being cheap because after I bought one, I bought another one very quickly afterwards. So I checked, and not only was it cheap, it still is cheap because they're still available. It is called the ThermoPro TP49. It is currently for Ireland a whopping €7.33 on Amazon. Now, this obviously isn't any sort of smart integration. This isn't HomeKit. This is just a little digital readout that has a battery in the back of it, and the battery has a very long life because I don't think I've ever changed it, and it's still going strong. It has a little kickstand and, like I say, a magnet on the back. And so I actually didn't throw them out when I got cooler, more high-tech things. I just changed what I use them for. So I have a whiteboard in the kitchen where I plan, where I basically write out all the food in the pantry and plan out what I'm going to eat what days to avoid food waste. That's a magnetic whiteboard. So I now have my home one of those stuck to it. And in work, I don't really want to run smart devices on a corporate network. Well, it wouldn't work very well. And B, it's just not a good idea. And C, I'd probably get in trouble. So for all sorts of reasons, that's not a goer. So I still actually use that one in work just to keep an eye on that everything in the office is fine. And actually now that I have actually paid more attention to not just the temperature, I can see that the smiley face is determined by the combination of temperature and humidity. So basically when your workspace is in a good place, you get a smiley face. When you're either the temperature or the humidity isn't right, you get a sort of a Midland face. And when it's really bad, you get a sad face. So actually it really is purpose built for a work environment, just to make sure that you're in a happy home environment. Anyway, having had my medical issues and having discovered that, humidity is important, I wanted something a little bit more robust, and I wanted something that I could keep an eye on my phone, and that would give me probably more accurate readings. So I invested in a HomeKit compatible air quality monitor. And I started basically by looking around at some Mac blogs I trust, looking for specifically HomeKit and air quality recommendations. They were the keywords I was using. And I don't remember which of the Mac blogs I've been following for years, but one of the popular Mac sites that have earned my trust over the years had an article, and they basically listed sort of two shortlisted devices, and one of them caught my eye, which is the Qing Ping Air Monitor Lite. And it has a couple of nice things. So first off, it is small. Secondly, it can be powered by USB-C. And thirdly, it has a very gently backlit display. And it has a nice array of sensors, and all of those sensors are sitting are available in HomeKit. So when I add it to a room, and then I go into that room in HomeKit, all the sensors are sitting right there in HomeKit. Now, I'm not sure I would use the word cheap for this diminutive little box. It's about 5 centimeters across, a little bit less tall than it is wide, and about as deep as it is wide. It's a small little box. But you don't pay for things by size. So, yeah, it's about €100, slightly less. But it's actually really nice, and the display is easy to read 24/7, and it doesn't blind. You can have it in the bedroom without it blinding you and stuff. So in the end, I've ended up kind of really, really liking them, and also the physical user interface I kind of like. So it doesn't have, well, it has around the back like a button for pairing it and stuff, but in your day-to-day usage, the interface is a touch-sensitive area on the top, a sort of a strip, a bit like a snooze button on an old alarm clock, I guess. It's a strip on the top of this little cube, and you swipe left and right to move between the different interfaces, and it will show you the different readouts as you swipe around. So in terms of what you can see, you will get the temperature and the humidity. You will get the PM 2.5 particles. So they're the little particles that are particularly bad for your breathing. The PM 10, which is your bigger dusty particles, and CO2, which particularly inside in the home office is actually kind of interesting to keep an eye on. It will also, actually just a small point to make is that when you go into HomeKit, those last few readings get combined into a single HomeKit air quality rating, which HomeKit will then tell you is excellent, good, or poor, etc. Which is probably actually, although my data nerd self wishes to see all of the fine-grained detail everywhere, I think human-wise, what you actually want to know is whether your air quality is good or not. You don't really, how many parts per million is the right parts per million? You don't know these things instinctively. So actually, excellent, good, poor is infinitely more useful than the raw number. So I don't mind that HomeKit condenses those sensors, but HomeKit does explicitly show you the temperature and the humidity. The other nice little thing, so like I say, this idea of a rating to help you deal with the numbers is useful. It's, it's a nice thing when you see it in HomeKit. So does that imply that the physical device is slightly inferior to HomeKit because it's giving me the raw numbers, whereas HomeKit is giving me a useful number? Well, no, because the physical device does both. It has its touch bar on the top. It has its very dim, it may even be an e-ink display that's slightly backlit. I don't remember the exact tech specs, but it's a very dim but very readable display. And it has an LED light straight above the display. It's a subtle an LED strip rather than a light, just a little coloured strip. And that strip changes colour depending on what it thinks. So if everything is good on the reading you have it set to, you get a green. So right now it is saying that my office here as I record is at 57% humidity, which is in the green zone. So it is a green LED. But if that goes to dry, I will get an orange LED. the same LED will turn orange. And if it gets too moist, it'll turn blue. And in terms of temperature, orange is too low. Or no, I think in temperature is reversed. Orange is too hot, blue is too cold. And for the other ones, it's basically green or orange. So your CO2 is either, some such thing as too little CO2, right? That doesn't make any sense. It's either not a bad amount of CO2 or a bad amount of CO2. So that one is just green and orange. And the same with the particles, the PM10 and the PM2.5. They're either is or isn't too much, but there's no such thing as too little dust in the air, or too little CO2. So it's actually a really nice little device. And, you plug it in over USB-C, which I have everywhere. So I have one sitting in the home office and one sitting in the bedroom, and it works great. But like I say, at €93, it's not exactly cheap, although in the US, it is notably cheaper at $76. I don't know why. But okay. Oh, yes, sorry. The last point I wanted to make is that it works great when you plug it in, but if you plug it out, it actually has a battery. So you can actually carry it around the house. So if you need to be in another room for a while, when it's on battery mode, it behaves almost as wonderfully as when it's plugged in. The only difference is the screen will go to sleep until you tap that touch-sensitive swipe region, and then it will come back on for 5 minutes, I think it is. It stays on for quite some time because it's just a dim little display, but not infinity. Whereas if you keep it plugged into USB-C, the display stays on for infinity. For the life of the device, I guess. Infinity is a big number. So, as Alison is very fond of saying, great, you're measuring something. Okay. So, what do you do about it if the number you get is wrong? Well, the answer is that, for me, I need to deal with air that is too dry. So, I need something that will respond to the air being too dry, and it will add humidity to the air. I need a humidifier, not a dehumidifier, which in Ireland gets a lot of very quizzical looks when I tell people about this purchase. So again, I went to the various trusted blogs and I ended up on, I can't remember which of the Apple sites again it was, but it was one of the well-trusted Apple sites, and they went through a couple of different possible products, and some of them were humidifier, dehumidifier, so you can actually have one device that can do both. Some of them were primarily diffusers for aromatherapy oils and stuff, which can also add humidity. And that's actually something you really, really, really don't want if you're trying to make the air moist for health reasons. You don't want it to be filling the air with particulates, with chemicals, basically. And the other thing then is, before I made a purchase, I did a lot of reading. And I mean a lot of reading, because it takes a while you need to do a lot of reading on the internet about anything to do with health until you can start to recognize the quackery from the medical advice. And if you only read one or two blog posts or whatever, you are very, very much in danger of reading the quackery instead of the sound science. So after I did a whole bunch of reading, I came to realize that there are actually two mechanisms for adding water into the air. So we all know that if you boil water, you get steam. Steam is water in the air. So one way to make humidity is to heat water. But then you end up with hot water in the air. Whereas what you actually want for your health reasons to stop things drying out is you want teeny tiny drops of cold water suspended in the air. You don't want steam that will condense and then cover your everything in wetness. You actually want it to stay in the air because it's in such a fine mist, and it's in that mist at its cold state. It's not in that mist because it's hot. And so basically you need a very, very, I presume it's a very fine little nozzle that makes a very, very fine spray, a very fine mist of cold water. And so these are the two mechanisms. And so I went hunting for a humidifier that was using the cold mechanism, which immediately means it's not usable for aromatherapy, because aromatherapy oils need to be heated to do their thing. So anyone you buy that's based off cold stuff is not going to do aromatherapy. And conversely, anyone marketed as an aromatherapy one isn't doing the cold thing. So from my health point of view, the cold thing was what I wanted. So that let me cut down loads of stuff. And in the end, I ended up with a device which is it's not ugly, but it's very utilitarian, but it's actually very practical, and it's designed specifically for use in a bedroom, which is exactly what I want, because that's the room I spend the most time in on a day-to-day basis, the single room I spend the most time in. And also, my experience of my nosebleeds is that morning was when I was getting them, which tells me that the issue is with sleeping arrangements. Anyway, I ended up buying a device called a VocoLink Smart Humidifier for Bedroom 2.5 litres. 2.5 litres is the size of the tank. That's a lot of water because it's designed to run for 5 days. Then you're supposed to clean it and refill it, and then you can run it for another 5 days, which is fantastic. Now, I don't run it 24/7 because I'm not in my bedroom all the time, but I could. So the reasons this device won out of my shortlist was the big tank and the 5 days between cleaning. That was kind of like, okay, I can live with this device. It supports a sensor activated mode. So as well as humidifying the air, it is also a humidity sensor, and it reports its sensings to HomeKit. One of its modes, it will only add moisture when the humidity falls below a threshold you can configure. And so at night, actually, that's perfect. You tell it, hi, please keep it at 60%, or please don't let it fall below 60%, and it will only inject water as and when needed instead of all the time. And it has a timer. So you can basically say, for 8 hours, keep the humidity above 60%. And finally, it has an integrated night light, which is an LED light with adjustable color. And I do mean the full rainbow of colors. And it's located underneath the water tank. So it's actually really cool. So basically, this thing has a frosted cylindrical, the whole thing is a frosted cylinder, basically a frosted white cylinder. And the top 75-80% of that frosted white cylinder is actually the water tank. And all of the mechanics are in the bottom little piece. And that is also where the light is, which shines up through the water. So the water ends up glowing, and then the frosted glass diffuses that glow, and you can change the brightness and the color of that light, which is really cool. There are also physical buttons. So yes, this thing is HomeKit integrated, but there are also physical buttons where you can manually control independently of each other the night light and the humidifier, and you can set a timer on it as well. There is an app from the company that I think you do. Well, I certainly ended up using it once to get the things set up and sort of introduced to HomeKit. But there is also HomeKit integration. And in fact, according to my notes, which I'm assuming I wrote when I knew this for a fact, yes, you do need the custom app in order to get it set up. And then inside that app, you basically choose, do I want to add this to a Google house or an Apple house? And also it gives you some extra settings. And now those extra settings are actually available through shortcuts, which is fantastic. But those extra settings let you set the target humidity, the brightness, and the color. Or actually, no, sorry, I'm reading my own show notes exactly backwards. HomeKit will let you set the target humidity, the brightness of the nightlight, and the color of the nightlight, which is actually really cool because then you can create a scene. So like I say, it's a utilitarian device, but you can make a scene. So I made a scene for myself that is my typical nighttime mode, which is 2% brightness and the same shade of green that the Apple Watch uses when it's in its nightstand mode. So basically at night, I put my watch in its nightstand mode, and my humidifier gives me exactly the same color, which is 2% brightness. And also actually my my radio alarm clock is the same one that Alison and Steve recommended many years ago, whose name eludes me right now, but it also allows you to set the color of its LED. So that's also set to that same shade of green. So basically everything in my room at night is that shade of green. And of course my target humidity then I have set to 60%. So why 60%? Well, this gets back to this whole, you have to Google medical things many, many, many times. And 60% is an interesting number, not because that is somehow the number everyone agrees on. Everyone gives different ranges, some narrow, some broad, but every single range I found contained the number 60%. That was not true of 50 or 40, but it was true of 60. Definitely wasn't true of 70. So basically, while no one agrees on the exact healthy range, everyone agrees that the number 60% is within the healthy range for sleeping arrangements. There is a whole other debate on what is appropriate for an office environment, which I'm just not going to go into because I really was interested in what do I do at night. So basically 60% seems to be the right, or seems to be not the wrong answer. And I ran it by my specialist, who initially looked very worried as if I was going to make him pick a number. And when I basically said, look, I know there's a lot of different thoughts on this, so I've chosen 60. Is that reasonable? And immediately his face brightened and he went, yes, that's absolutely reasonable. So that was good. Now, I mentioned this is a fairly utilitarian, fairly utilitarian device. It's not all that expensive because it's utilitarian rather than fancy pants and elegant. It is plastic rather than glass, for example. So it's frosted plastic. It kind of looks like frosted glass, but it isn't glass. Anyway, it's €44.47 at the moment on Amazon here in Ireland, which isn't bad at all. And thanks to the magic of HomeKit combined with the magic of shortcuts, I now have a one-click button which does all the following. It enables a scene that sets the nightlight to 2%, the humidity to 60%. So that is my scene that I have defined, and I can trigger that scene any way you can trigger scenes in HomeKit. But this shortcut does more than just trigger that scene. It also enables the 8-hour timer feature, and it turns off my bedside lamp. So basically, when I trigger that scene, all the lights in my room go out and the humidifier turns on at its 2% green, 60% humidity for 8 hours, which is a pretty nice way to, last thing at night, tap that one button, which is sitting on a widget, of course, on my home screen, and hey presto, we're all good for the next 8 hours. Actually, and speaking of little bonus tips, I also want to recommend an app called Home Widget for HomeKit, which allows you to create more powerful HomeKit-based widgets for your home screen / whatever that screen is you swipe to the left to get to. I had sort of assumed that I wouldn't need anything more than Apple's default set of widgets to create me everything I wanted for my HomeKit stuff. And I got very frustrated because I couldn't combine shortcuts with sensor readings, with setting a scene and toggling a scene and so forth. And it was feeling clunky, and I was making multiple widgets instead of what I wanted was, single widgets for basically two different purposes. And in the end, I again did a bunch of searching around and very quickly found that a whole bunch of people I really trust agree that if you want a nice HomeKit experience with widgets that are very powerful and very customizable, you want a home widget for HomeKit. It has an annual subscription for $4.99 per year, or you can buy it outright for $9.99. And initially when I wrote the show notes, I thought I was paying $4.99 a year, but actually I checked and I just bought the lifetime. So go me. It is really cool. So the way I'm using it is on my home screen, I have a quick little 2x2 grid, which allows me to quickly access the most important scenes and shortcuts. This is a mix of scenes and shortcuts, which is kind of cool. And they also act as sort of indicators. So I have a bedtime scene, which sets my desk lamp to a dim red. And when I tap that lights up that square. I have a daytime scene, which sets that same desk lamp to 100% pure white. And the daytime scene also turns off the humidifier. So if the 8 hours aren't up yet, as soon as I hit that daytime scene, the humidifier turns off anyway, regardless of what the timer said. And I actually have a connection made between my alarm going off on my iPhone and that daytime scene. Although I added another shortcut in between so that it actually turns on that lamp at 25%, then 50%, then 75%, and then it flicks over to the daytime mode. With, I think it's 5 seconds in between. So I get sort of, it's not quite a dimmer switch because it's in jumps of 25%, but it works. It works. Anyway, so that is toggles for scenes, and then below that I have a button named Start Humidifier, which is actually a trigger for a workflow or a shortcut. So I keep calling them workflows in my head because that's what they used to be before Apple bought them. And also because it's something else I do sort of in the evening is I don't like to have my electric toothbrush charging all the time. So I have a scene that I can trigger which turns on a smart plug where the toothbrush is plugged in. Also from Meros. I have a lot of Meros stuff around my house. Must be something to do with Allison. Anyway, that little button there turns on that smart plug until 12 noon the next day and then turns it off again. So basically on the days where my toothbrush says, I'd like to be charged, I just hit that button once and then it's charging until the next morning, by which time it'll be ready. And then on that screen you get to when you swipe to the left of your home screen, what I actually have is a grid showing the air quality readings from the Quinnipiac devices for my bedroom and my home office, so I can quickly see at a glance how we're doing. And one of the powerful things that the home widget gives you is that you get customization about the labeling of those items and how you like them displayed, the icons and stuff like that. So it's a lot more customizable than you would get with the standard Apple HomeKit stuff. So basically I have a 4x2 to give me the air quality, the humidity, the temperature, and the CO2 in the office, and the air quality, the temperature, the air quality, the humidity, the temperature, and the CO2 in the bedroom. It's a nice little 2x2 grid. So anyway, that is my humidity-based HomeKit journey. I keep saying I haven't gotten into home automation yet. And then I keep sort of thinking, oh, actually, no, I sort of have. So that's a little sneak into, or a little peek into some of my HomeKit adventures. And so far, touch wood, they have been robust, stable, and have worked really well for me. And have not added stress to my life, but actually made life a little bit less stressful, which I do believe is rather the point of automation.
Living in a very temperate climate, I'm afraid we don't have a very strong need for a humidity sensors or any more humidity devices. But I'm telling you, I do know people who need them, and I'm going to recommend basically everything Bart recommended here. That was fantastic, Bart. Really appreciate it. Well, I was tootling along on my morning walk this week when I got a notification from Slack on my Apple Watch. It was from No Silicast away Scott Kelsey. Scott was asking me for the name of the app that I love so much that lets me track items in my home. I knew the answer to that right off the top of my head, so I popped open Slack on my iPhone and I answered him that it was Under My Roof, and I sent him one of the App Store links. I put my phone away, and in just a few seconds, Scott responded, also in Slack, "Wow, that's service." I laughed, but the next notification after that made me smile even more. He had immediately gone to podfeed.com/donate and bought me a couple of cups of coffee. He certainly didn't have to do that, but I love how it's so easy to say thanks now. And with that, I'll thank Scott for his generous support of the shows. Well, it's that time of the week again. It's time for Security Bits with Bart Busschots. How are you doing today, Bart?
I am doing good. This is day 1, because we're recording a day early, of my extended leave. So, yay.
You're on the work 11 months of the year plan now, right?
Yes, or the reduced working year scheme, to make it sound uninteresting.
Well, that's good. You've got a big stack of fun little projects ready to go, I bet. And how many of them are work on your taxes and how many are have fun?
I'm hoping to have all of that stuff done by New Year's Day, and then to start 2025 with an empty slate of fun projects. That's my plan.
There you go.
Today was Christmas
goals.
Shopping. That wasn't fun.
Oh. What'd you get me? A Security Bits episode.
Yes. No, it's the grocery kind, and everyone in the country was like, oh my God, we must buy everything in the world because Christmas is coming and the shops will be closed. I went in, Our supermarket opened at 7 a.m. I was there at 8 and it was crowded.
You were there at 8? I didn't know you've ever been up at 8 in the morning.
Yeah, it's been a while. It was dark. What's wrong?
It's always dark in Ireland. Well, we're actually here to do some security bits, but hey, it's the holidays. It's time to just goof around, right?
It is absolutely time to goof around. My Mac literally has festive lights dangling off the dock. So yeah, I'm in that mood.
There you go.
So we have a follow-up story to get started. Literally from the last time we talked about the FBI having said, yeah, that little hack that we knew affected a few telcos, it was actually 8 of them, and there's a whole bunch more in other countries that it's not up to us to name, and please use encryption, which we talked about in detail. Well, that has now been stereo echoed or whatever by the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, as they prefer to be called. And they have now updated their documentation for what people of importance should do. So this is every member of Congress, every CEO, every person who might be traveling to China with trade secrets. They have a list of, what they call exposed people, I think is the term they use, rather than vulnerable. It's just really good advice, though. And again, it's laying out the importance of end-to-end encryption. And they give like a tip of the hat to Signal as well, which is kind of interesting that seems to be the de facto open source, known to be good product. And what I like about CISA is that they're not conflicted like the FBI are. Because the FBI, half of their job is to break encryption, and half of their job is to secure people. So that's in conflict. They're in conflict with themselves. CISA is only about security. So they don't have that split brain going on where they're both against and for, because they don't try to break anything. They're only interested in protecting. Anyway, link in the show notes. It's a good document.
Hey, I'm going to do a feedback and follow up on the fly, not having prepared it and not having told Bart about it. I believe it was the last time we got together that you talked about the different security levels of different ways of doing communications. We talked about obviously SMS being the worst and going up through RCS, and when RCS is secure and not secure, and WhatsApp being really secure, Signal being the most secure. We went through that. Breaking news, the Scottish government has banned WhatsApp from use on government devices, is the title, and it's being reported that way. But if you read the actual messaging, they're banning all non-corporate conversation tools, social media tools. They don't define what non-corporate is. But the weird thing is, it's not because they're saying this is there's security flaws in this.
The opposite.
They're doing it as a punishment because apparently a bunch of senior or civil servants deleted a bunch of information from WhatsApp about the COVID pandemic or during the COVID pandemic. Do you know more about this story?
I don't know about this story, but I can put a lot of meat on that. So that's a compliance issue. So basically, if you do work for the government or for a corporation, the same applies. It's your duty to do all of your official work in a mechanism that you can comply with data protection laws. And those laws work 2 ways. You need to be able to secure stuff and produce stuff on demand because you're paid for by the public, or you have a fiduciary duty. So if you delete something while you're working for the government, that's a crime. And the only way corporations can enforce that is to have a managed platform like Zoom. If you have a corporate Zoom account, there's a copy of your messages sent to a database that the company owns. So there's a third secret key in every conversation. That third key is the company's key. So Zoom don't see anything. It's still end-to-end encrypted, but there's a third end in every conversation, the company. And so that's saved for a legal hold or for compliance. But if you go off the reservation, if you go and do stuff privately, they're relying on you to be good. They can't do it technologically. They don't have a technological control. So the control you use is block them on corporate devices. Thou shalt use our Slack. Yeah, same thing though, right? Employer, government, it works out the same. This is for state employees.
Right. I'm just wondering what non-corporate means when it's the government. So I guess it's whatever tool, if they're using Teams, for example.
Yeah. So if your department uses Teams and you use Slack, then you're off the reservation. If you're a Slack department and you use Teams, then you're off the reservation. You should be using what is provided to you where you log in with SSO from your office.
Okay.
It's compliance.
Okay.
It's not security. It's not that it's an encryption risk. It's about compliance.
I thought it was interesting because it was the big headline is they're banning WhatsApp. But if you keep reading, it's like, yeah, but they're actually banning all of them except for whatever's considered the official one.
Hey, what you should be doing is doing work stuff on your work device and personal stuff on the phone you have in your pocket because it's 2024. Just about. For another week.
No, it's just about 2025, Bart.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, I thought it was interesting that the way it was being reported. And like you say, it is a compliance story.
Yeah. Right. Deep dives. No, we have no deep dives. I forgot to delete that heading. That's why I was like, I don't remember writing a deep dive, but I didn't. It's action alerts. December Patch Tuesday has been and gone. Only 71 bugs, which isn't a huge amount, but one of them is a 0 day, so patchy, patchy, patch, patch. And I love the headline from the Internet Storm Center from Sans. Apple updates everything. Yeah, pretty much. Patchy, patchy, patch, patch.
All right.
That takes us to worthy
That was
warning.
a little while ago. That was Safari 18.2 and all
iOS,
the
iPadOS,
15.2 and iOS. Yeah. Everything.
Yeah, I think that was like the day after we recorded last.
Okay.
Worthy warnings then. Lots of heads up here, and given that it's the holiday season, it's probably a good time to remind people to be careful and to remind your friends and family to be careful. The first one, though, is firmly pointed at No Silicastaways, not your friends and family. I've said a few times that we're not going to talk about every time someone does something naughty on a repository of popular libraries like NPM, because we'd be doing it every week. But I figured now might be time to do a little reminder. So NPM and all of those repositories, don't guess the names. Thousands of people downloaded malicious libraries impersonating malicious tools. So yeah, don't do that. I just realized I accidentally tabbed in the next story. That's not a sub story. It's a whole different story. So as I say,
Okay.
if you're using NPM and you're looking for a library that is the NPM version of ESLint, go to the ESLint website. They'll give you the real name. Don't just guess. The typos are full of malicious stuff. Absolutely wedged with it.
Yeesh. Okay.
Okay, so there is a scam doing the rounds, particularly in the United States, apparently. It comes in over SMS, and it says, Apple approval notice. You must do blah, blah, blah to approve such and such. Your Apple ID will be shut down. It's horse poop. Not real. That's not how Apple works.
I was very proud of my nephew for contacting me just 2 days ago, sending it to me and saying, hey, I feel like this is a dumb question, but is this real? Nope. And always ask me. Good job.
Yes, absolutely. And while we're on the fire extinguisher neck of woods here, there are a bunch of TikTok videos going viral, getting a lot of clicks and views for saying very scary things about Apple. They're also horse poop. So no, AirDrop doesn't steal your credit card information. If someone comes close to your phone and AirDrop activates for you to maybe send something, they haven't just got your credit card details. Yes, it uses NFC. No, they haven't just taken an Apple Pay. Stupid. And the other one that I don't even understand how is there's a video saying that the Photos app is telling people who viewed your messages. I don't even grok how those things are connected. But anyway, that's what TikTok says. Also wrong. Absolute garbage. Now, the next two stories both explain the same new trend in malware. Attackers are starting to very proactively make illegitimate use of legitimate things, because a lot more organizations are switching to allow listing. And so you get to sneak through the security by being from PayPal or from DocuSign or from, what's the other one listed there? Venmo. It happens to be another example. And Google is a case.
So they're real invoices. It's just you don't owe the money.
Right. Yes, exactly. So they'll pass all of the normal sniff tests because the email is legitimate. It's not from a spoofed domain. Every security test will pass because it really is sent to you via PayPal. It's just not for something you bought from someone you bought anything from. It's some randomer has sent you an invoice. And what they will do is they will abuse things like the seller comment field. And in that field, which they control, they will write what at first glance looks like PayPal's anti-fraud line. If you think this transaction is fraudulent, phone this number. It's not PayPal's number. It's typed into the text box where you could type horse battery staple, pancakes, waffles, whatever you like. So check the header above information. If that's a field put there by the person who sent you the invoice, do not believe anything. Phone numbers, email addresses, they could type anything, right? The actual PayPal fraud line, get it from PayPal. Don't get it from the content of the invoice, you know? The one that really set me off on this path is that Google have consolidated all of their services under one domain because it lets them share cookies without it being a third-party cookie. It's about tracking you better. It used to be maps.google.com and mail.google.com, and now it's google.com/maps, google.com/mail.
Really?
Right? So
that's interesting.
It is. So that means that the cookie has to be shared because it's on the same domain. So there's no way to break it apart.
I've always been unclear on this, and everybody forgive me who understands it already. Why is, if they still have the same top-level domain, mail.google.com and maps.google.com, why is that not the same domain and they're still first-party cookies?
Your browser has a choice of whether or not to segregate them because they are in different buckets. They can say that the cookie should be shared, and they're allowed to say that it should because they do own the parent domain. But the browser still can. So Firefox, to protect you, was segregating those cookies for Google because that way you could log into Maps without Google being able to connect it to other stuff, like search and stuff. But by putting it on the one domain, the browser literally can't tell the difference. There is no difference. So that's why they did it. But anyway, there's a side effect of that. Google Forms is now sitting on the same top-level domain as everything else. And you can make a Google form to send you anything. And where does the email come from? blah-de-blah at google.com. And people have managed to register plausible names like, customer support sales Ireland at google.com and stuff like that. Using Google Forms, they can trigger an email that validly comes from Google servers, provably so, digitally signed. And it arrives and you think, oh, this is the anti-fraud team. And someone literally lost $500,000 worth of Bitcoin in one click with a Google Forms fake.
Oh my gosh.
And this is happening in other places too. I think it was Teams or something. No, actually, no, it was Microsoft Forms. Jesus, Forms are dangerous. Don't use Forms. Between Google Forms and Microsoft Forms. So this kind of stuff has been happening. And then an entirely separate story is a particularly fine-tuned version of this problem of using legitimate services illegitimately is to do it with payment services. And the three that are just being used so widely at the moment, I have seen this for real with all of my hats on, is PayPal, Venmo, and DigiSign. So they're legitimately from PayPal, but anyone can send an invoice on PayPal, right? I invoice people through PayPal all the time, so I do all of my stuff. So I can send anyone an invoice saying, please pay, Bart Officer Creations $1 million. No one's going to do that, but I could also send an invoice that says something really scary, final payment, you've already committed blah, de blah, phone this number if you have a problem and make it be my number and steal all your money. And that's what's happening.
Wow.
Yeah. So just be very careful. You can have totally legitimate invoices for absolutely illegitimate things. Yeah. Be careful. Right. Notable news then. I've definitely jiggered things to be ugh first, and then we'll get less ugh as we go along. So the first one is important. So words matter. There was a terrible name for what is a really popular way to defraud people of millions of dollars, which is AI-based chatbots that spend a month striking up a romantic conversation and eventually turn it towards a cool crypto investment, and you get a dashboard and it looks like your money's getting a good return, and then all of a sudden it all evaporates and disappears and you never hear from the person again. And the name that was used was pig butchering, because you fatten a pig and then you have bacon. But it's a horrible word, right? Who is going to say, I was a victim of pig butchering? It's so demeaning. So Interpol have decided that we actually need people to feel comfortable talking about this crime. So from now on, everyone in Interpol is never to say those words. It is romance baiting. And that's literally what it is.
That's better. Yeah.
Much better. And that really matters.
Yeah.
Now, the next two stories I put here, because they are companies we care about, and it sort of gives me an opportunity to have a conversation in public that I had with you, but I'm not going to say in any way why. It's just people have some misconceptions about the GDPR in Europe. And I think people assume that if you're caught in a data breach, you're in trouble because of the data breach. But that's not really why you're in trouble, if you get in trouble. So if you have a data breach, you have a duty to report it, and you have a duty to disclose it responsibly to the people whose data you've lost. But if you lost it without being negligent, and if you reported in a timely and accurate manner, then there's no fine. It has been reported, it has been processed, it's in the statistics, but that's the end of it. There is no more. You're not punished because you haven't done anything wrong. Right. So when you hear fines, it means one of two things has happened. Either the company was negligent up front. They didn't take seriously their duty to protect your data, because you have a responsibility to be, to protect people's data. You have something of value, you must protect it. And you can be found negligent. Or you knew a data breach had happened and you kept stum. You didn't report it, didn't responsibly disclose. Then you will also get fined. Or if you're Meta, you did both. You both didn't protect it up front, and you didn't give an honest
tried to hide it.
Disclosure. You minimized what actually happened.
I have an analogy for a way to think about this. If you were out when you were a teenager and you knew you were going to be late and you called your parents and told them, you were in way less trouble than if you just showed up late, or worse yet, you pulled a Meta and you snuck in a window and they caught you.
Absolutely.
Is that a good analogy?
It is, actually. And one of the interesting things is the Irish Data Protection Commissioner loves going to tech conferences to show people, I'm a human being, really friendly. It's a lady at the moment. She was really nice too, but the last was a really friendly guy. And he basically went, look, I'm not your enemy. If you talk to me honestly, I'll talk to you honestly, and we'll be fine. Just don't lie. It's a good message. Right. And the other people who need to learn that message is Netflix. So they didn't actually have clear and accurate policies. So we don't take your data, or what we do, we don't really do what we do. Basically, they lied in their, that statement no one ever reads. You still have to be honest, right? Just because no one reads it. So they got in trouble for that. So you get in trouble not for being breached, but for being negligent or not being honest. And that's what happened.
And they also hid a problem?
Yeah, so you're supposed to tell people in your data statement what you actually do with the data, and you're not supposed to do things you don't tell people you do, which is where Netflix fell short.
Okay, but they only got fined 4.75 million euro, where Meta got $264 million in fines?
Yeah.
Different scale.
Different scale.
Okay.
Yeah. Then we move to the United States. We're still in the ick area. The Office of the Inspector General, which I just have this vision of someone with a really big hat being very important, but it's probably way less interesting. Anyway, the OIG has spent the last 4 years trying to figure out whether or not the subpoenas that were sent at Apple for messaging details about the families of Democratic lawmakers sent by the Trump DOJ, whether or not that was actually legitimate, those subpoenas. They were not.
I don't remember that. They were not.
They were not.
Okay.
You're not allowed to subpoena Apple for that information. That's not appropriate. So that's
I
interesting.
don't even remember that happening. Do you remember that?
I remember it breaking a long time after it happened. It didn't leak that the government had done it until a year or two later, at which point it wasn't as much of a scandal because, it's old news. But I do remember it happening, thinking, well, that's a bit ick.
Yeah.
Ugh. Yeah,
I'm sure
not
glad
ick,
we got out of
ugh.
the ick part, Bart.
Yeah. Okay. No, we have one more. But you get to do the last bit of ick, and then I turn us around.
Okay, good. All right. So the U.S. authorities are launching an investigation into Chinese router maker TP-Link for a possible ban due to security risks. And the reason I wanted to bring this up is, we generally, it's an investigation. So what? Nothing's coming of that. Tom Merritt on the Daily Tech News Show Tom Merritt in real life and on the Daily Tech News Show is one of these calm, non-inflammatory, doesn't make a lot of inflammatory predictions. His analysis of what's happening here is that it is inevitable that there will be a ban after the investigation. And here's a couple of things behind that is, first of all, it is a Chinese-owned company. And during a patent investigation or suit, TP-Link tried to convince the judge that we really have two totally different businesses. We have a Chinese business and we have a U.S. business. And the judge called it implausible when he denied their argument. So they really are a Chinese company. There is no doubt they're a Chinese company. They own 60% market share of U.S. retail market. I've seen 65 and 60, but the sources I trust said 60. But anyway, that's a distinction without a difference, or difference without a distinction. Anyway, so 60% market share of the U.S. retail market of a Chinese company. And how many times, Bart, have we talked about TP-Link having failures, security failures? Things they didn't tell us about. Things we found out about too late. Those are the kinds of things that have stacked up. There is nothing in the list of malfeasance and or maybe incompetence combined with Chinese company to the U.S. that would lead Tom to believe that anything other than a ban would happen next. Now,
bear in mind,
go ahead.
The mechanism whereby a state actor would sneak malware in is pretend incompetence. Oh, bug. Oh, we weren't spying. Bug. Whoopsie daisies. Let's patch that.
Whoopsie daisy. I love it. So I put a link to the DTNS 4918 and its timestamp to right when they started talking about this. But another interesting piece of that is Roger Chang, the producer, pops into the conversation and he says, yeah, you know what? I've got 4 TP-Link routers and I have flashed the firmware on all of them to be DDWRT. And that's something that, man, I remember back in the old Linksys router days doing that. And I was capable of doing it. And so if you are the type of person who thinks that's a better idea than throwing it in the bin, consider flashing your TP-Link routers with DDWRT, and then you don't have to throw your hardware away, possibly.
Yeah, good call. Definitely. Totally agree with that. Yeah.
All right.
Excellent. Okay, so now I get to take us into more positive territory. The Germans caught my eye. So there is a piece of malware that has ended up being preloaded into a whole bunch of Android-based sort of devices. So we're not talking phones here. We're talking smart TVs and those kind of, sticks and those kind of things.
Sure.
And a bunch of them are available dirt cheap, and they have malware in them, whether through incompetence or whether through intentional supply chain attacks. Who knows? By the way, they're riddled with malware trying to phone home. And the German government basically went, I'll tell you what, why don't we just block that at the country level? None of these devices in Germany can phone home. Problem solved.
Well, for Germany.
Right, but the German government shouldn't block anything else, right? The German government shouldn't be interfering with anyone else's internet. So I like this. They're not overstepping anything.
No, it's correct. But now does that mean that Belgium has to do it and the United States has to do it and Finland has to do it?
Yeah. Or if, actually, to be honest, if Interpol did it, they could, rather than black holing the DNS at the country level, they could just take the DNS off these people, seize the domain. But there's a lot of very clever chicanery of doing things in jurisdictions where international, what now? Who are you? Yeah. So, anyway.
That's a fun one, though. That is a non-ick story.
It is, absolutely. Then we move to top tips. Now, this is a difficult conversation, but a spectacularly important conversation. And we're going to have lots of No Silicastaways with family visiting them or visiting family. A legacy contact is something your Apple account, I can't say Apple ID, Apple account. A legacy contact is something your Apple account should have. It is a person who you have designated as being okay for Apple to give your information to if you die. So this means they can get as much information as is possible. If you combine a legacy contact with a shared password and 1Password, they should be able to get everything of yours if you pass, like all of those amazingly important memories on your phone. So it's very important.
It is data. You don't get, like, say, for example, their apps.
No, because that's
but it's the
license. It's the data.
Yeah.
It's the data. Yeah, you don't just get to inherit all their content or their, paid for media or apps. That would be kind of cool to be able to hand those down in your will or something, but no. We don't own software. We just rent. Them. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So you put a link in the show notes to the Mac Observer article. We actually sent the instructions to Steve's mom just about a week and a half ago, just coincidentally, just said, I don't know, you don't take a lot of photos, but, you've got some music, whatever,
right.
If you would like to do this, actually the music depends on if it's rented, I guess. But anyway, if you would like to do this, here's how to do it.
Yeah, I ended up doing it with my dad on the phone at random. I think he wanted to change Mum's iCloud password. And I went, by the way, while you're in there, there's a little thing at the bottom of that same screen. And he went down to it and went, oh, look, you're my legacy contact. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess we've done this.
I've been there before. But yeah, that's a good one for over the holidays, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then I want to give a shout out to listener Lynn in the wonderful Slack at podfeed.com/Slack. Where she posted a link to a podcast from the AARP, which I believe is the American Association of Retired Persons.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. They basically have some really good advice for how people who use US carriers can secure their phone from SIM jacking, which is the first step in a lot of really nasty malware, because banks, despite everything we know, love SMS for two-factor authentication. So if someone can become your cell phone number and they have your password, because maybe your bank has really terrible policies, like they're not allowed to be longer than 8 characters, this also happens in banks, then they can steal your money. So stopping SIM swapping is really important. And the reason I say it's US specific is because every carrier around the world gets to have their own policies and procedures, and the instructions in this podcast are AT&T and T-Mobile and so forth.
Right. Okay, cool. Yay, Lynn.
Absolutely. I don't see any extra palette cleansers, so I think I'm the only one cleansing some palettes. This, I think, is a story that really affects you and I. So we are both extremely heavy users of the amazing products from Rogue Amoeba. Right now, there would be silence on this recording without Rogue Amoeba. We wouldn't hear each other and there'd be nothing recorded. It'd be a complete mess, right?
Right.
And we've seen them struggle a little bit outwardly, but under the hood, they had an existential crisis because Apple pulled the rug out from under them as they tried to secure macOS. And I've had hints of this story, but they wrote a blog post and it's really well told. It's just a really well written blog post. It tells the story, you get all the suspense and you come along for the journey. And it explains how Rogue Amoeba were able to basically completely overcome this. And they're now in a stronger position than they've ever been. And they're now getting really good support from Apple. But there was a time when things looked real bad. And now I feel a lot less bad about the bugs you and I have experienced in the last year. Now that I know what was going on behind the scenes, this move from, Arc to Ace?
No, Ace to Arc.
Oh, God, I get it wrong.
Yeah, so Arc is the new one.
Yes.
That's interesting. I have not read this. I'm real curious to hear the background. But yeah, what ACE stands for Audio Capture Engine and ARC is Audio Routing Kit. The ACE method of capturing audio with things like Audio Hijack and doing interesting things with loopback and creating aggregate devices was real janky. ACE was really hard. You had to go in and change security settings at the what is that method of booting up where it's all kernel level stuff?
Turn off security integrity protection, SIP, isn't it? SIP?
No, I don't think we had to turn SIP off. We didn't have to do that, but we had to lower the security level basically to one level below the highest. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It's gone now. You don't have to do any of that janky stuff. So I didn't know that there was something really scary coming. I've always wondered why they're allowed to do what they do. So I'm glad that they are maybe more official now with Apple being happy.
Yes. As you'll find out, they were given special exemption. What they were doing with ACE shouldn't have been possible in the last two versions of macOS, but they were given a little bit of a leeway by Apple. There was actually a hard-coded exemption in macOS.
Ooh. And then they were running out of time on, okay, we're not going to keep doing it.
Well, Apple were a little bit slow. Apple said, here's a temporary pass. We are going to make an API for you and for everyone else to do audio routing legitimately so that every app can use these APIs. They're going to be proper APIs, sandboxed, all the usual stuff. So anyone can now do audio routing thanks to Rogue Amoeba, basically.
Okay.
So now with Arc, it's 100% supported, 100% secure, so you don't have to lower your security settings.
So not just Apple looking the other way.
Correct.
Okay. So that could open up competition for Rogue Amoeba.
It could, but the thing is, the fact that the APIs exist is 1/10 of the work that went into the Arc plugin, right?
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. No, I'm not saying they don't deserve
have a head
the
start
market that they have. Yeah. I wonder whether that opens up any possibility they would ever allow something like this on iOS.
It makes it technically much easier because it's much easier for Apple to port a stable API to iPadOS than it is to start from scratch, which is what they had to do before. I would not be surprised if the iPad Pro all of a sudden was able to do this kind of stuff. And then podcasters
someday, probably
could
not
do
soon, but yeah. That's something that a lot of people might not know is that you literally can't do what Bart and I are doing on an iOS. They don't let
Not on an iPad. You'd need multiple devices and then mush it all together later. Like I'm sure you could jury rig it with like an iPhone and an iPad and split all of these cool apps we have off into separate physical pieces. But that's it's hard enough when it's all on the back.
If it's possible. Yeah, exactly. Well, very cool. That will be fun to read. I'm looking forward to that. I love the people at Rogue Amoeba, and even though we were whining about a few wee bugs that we were having, they were always there for us. They're the greatest team. Fantastic people.
And they can write. Honestly, it's really well written post. I really enjoyed reading it.
Oh yeah. Oh, their documentation is the best. The best documentation of any app I've ever used, bar none. It's
apparently
best in class.
It's trumped by Flying Meat Software with Acorn, which apparently has the very, very, very best documentation.
1000% disagree. But I haven't checked lately, but it was one of the reasons I don't. I got to make sure I'm not mixing up Pixelmator in them, but I remember one of those two apps, just terrible documentation, like the worst.
That'll be Pixelmator.
Oh, was it? Okay. Like they tell you to use this tool, but they wouldn't show you what the tool looked like. Like they didn't have the icon. They wouldn't even put a freaking
I ran into this 2 weeks ago and it drove me nuts because it said you do this and you do this. Only the words and what I was looking at.
Two totally different things, huh?
Yeah.
Well, I'll go back and look at Acorn. We'll see. We'll see if they can meet my standards. But they're also, everything Rogue Amoeba does is fully accessible to the blind. Unbelievable.
Nice. Yeah, and when you see Audio Hijack.
I've now taught 3 blind people to use Audio Hijack.
Wow.
It's amazing.
Wow. When I look at Audio Hijack, the thought that it's possible to make that accessible just makes my head explode. These people are brilliant.
Yeah, well, they built the new versions from the ground up, accessible first. And the reason Bart's saying that it's unbelievable that it is it's a drag and drop interface. You have little blocks you drop in. There's little colored lines that move. There's all these indicators that, how could that be accessible? But it is.
Wow.
Anyway, okay, enough love fest.
Yes, indeed.
They're not paying for this episode.
Yeah, they should, though. They really should.
They don't have to.
True. Okay, well, that's all I got. And, you know, it's a festive episode, so we didn't really stay particularly on target. But hey, who cares?
I think a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to you then, Bart.
Yes, because 2 weeks from now, it will be 2025. Jesus. Wow. Yeah,
Sure
folks,
will.
have a peaceful and joy-filled holiday season with those you love. And remember, stay patched so you stay secure.
Well, that's going to wind us up for this week. Did you know you can email me at allison@podfeed.com anytime you like? If you have a question or a suggestion, just send it on over. Remember, everything good starts with podfeed.com. You can follow me on Mastodon at podfeed.com/Mastodon. And if you want to listen to the podcast on YouTube, like the kids do today, you can go to podfeed.com/YouTube. If you want to join the conversation, you can join our Slack community at podfeed.com/Slack, where you can talk to me and Steve Mattan and all of the other lovely No Silicastaways. You can support the show at podfeed.com/Patreon or with a one-time donation like Scott did at podfeed.com/donate. There you can use Apple Pay or any credit card. Or if you like PayPal, go to podfeed.com/PayPal. And if you want to join the fun of the live show, you're going to have to wait until January 12th when we'll be back from CES. And then you can head on over to podfeed.com/live on Sunday nights at 5 p.m. Pacific time and join the friendly and enthusiastic No Silicastaways. Thanks for listening and stay subscribed. Well, it's that time of the week again. It's time for Chit Chat. No, it isn't. Start over.
Unplink.